scientists found a plane buried in Arctic ice. A plane, long buried in the unforgiving Arctic ice, has finally been unearthed.
A team of scientists trekked across the frozen Arctic, expecting nothing more than endless ice and snow. But then they spotted something incredible, the unmistakable shape of an aircraft buried deep beneath the surface. At first, it looked like just another World War relic swallowed by time. But when they finally broke through the ice and stepped inside, they realized this was no ordinary crash site. What they uncovered would leave them stunned and raise more questions than answers. From mysterious cargo to chilling secrets, this discovery may change everything we thought we knew about history hidden in the Arctic. Join us in this video as we reveal the details. A plane frozen in time. High above the Swiss Alps, the helicopter hums as it glides over a sea of white. But the snow below isn't untouched. The once solid glacier is breaking apart, melting faster than ever before. And with the melting ice, the past is finally rising back to the surface. Suddenly, a jagged scar cuts across the pristine snow. What looks at first like a streak of silver and red scrap turns out to be something far more shocking. "That's the plane," says mountain guide Dominic Nellen, leaning forward and pointing out the window.
A melting glacier in Switzerland revealed the remnants of a plane crash from the 1960s. Dominic Nellen, a mountain guide, made the discovery this month while on a trek up the Altesh Glacier.
Below, resting awkwardly on the Altesh Glacier, is the wreck of a Piper Cherokee aircraft. It had vanished without a trace back in 1968, only to reappear more than 50 years later when the ice gave up its grip. For Dominic, the discovery was surreal. "At first I thought it was just two backpacks," he recalls. But as the helicopter lands and he steps onto the frozen ground, the truth becomes undeniable. Sticking out of the ice are twisted wings, bent seats, a cracked eyeglass case, and even a bright red hat, all frozen in time. Everyday objects from the 1960s, preserved perfectly by the glacier's icy tomb. The three passengers who once boarded that doomed flight were recovered decades ago. But the aircraft itself remained hidden, too far out of reach for authorities at the time. Now, thanks to the Great Thaw, it has resurfaced like a ghost from history. And this isn't the only grim reminder the Alps have revealed. In recent months, hikers have stumbled upon human remains, victims swallowed by the mountains decades earlier, only now released as the ice retreats. Dominic shakes his head as he looks over the wreckage. "The glaciers are disappearing," he says quietly. "They say by 2090, only 10% will remain." It's a haunting reminder that the Arctic and alpine ice sheets are not just vanishing landscapes. They are vaults of history, slowly unlocking their secrets as the world warms. From plains trapped in ice to glaciers vanishing fast. What's happening? Let's find out. The Great Disappearance of the Glaciers. Switzerland's glaciers are vanishing before our very eyes. In less than a century, they have already lost half of their total volume, a staggering collapse confirmed by new research from ETH Zurich and the Swiss Federal Institute on Forest, Snow, and Landscape Research. For the first time, scientists have reconstructed the country's ice loss across the entire 20th century, tracing it all the way back to 1931. What they found was alarming. By 2016, the glaciers had already shrunk by 50%. And since then, in less than a decade, they've shed another 12%. The numbers tell one part of the story, but to see the glaciers themselves is to feel the weight of it. At Glacier 3000, in the Les Diablerets region, an ancient mountain pass sealed under ice for more than 2,000 years, is now almost completely uncovered. Only a thin, fragile layer remains, and experts say it will vanish entirely by the end of this season. Bernhard Chanin, CEO of Glacier 3000, has watched the retreat firsthand. "We have lost 3 times more ice this summer," he explains, almost in disbelief. "It's really crazy how fast it's changing. At this pace, the Sex Rouge Glacier will disappear in the next 10 or 15 years. It's only 30 to 35 meters deep. The reasons for this collapse are layered, just like the glaciers themselves. A weak snowfall last winter left them without protection. Sahara dust storms blanketed the Alps, darkening the surface and causing the ice to absorb more heat. Then came a warm spring, followed by one of the hottest, driest summers on record. This year we have been experiencing an extraordinary hot and dry summer in the Alps and elsewhere in Europe," says Mauro Fischer, a glaciologist at the University of Bern. "For Swiss glaciers, we will measure the most negative annual mass balances ever recorded since in situ measurements began. The glaciers are not just retreating, they are collapsing at a speed that scientists once thought impossible. And with each ton of ice that melts, something unexpected is revealed. Fragments of history, lost travelers, forgotten relics, and sometimes entire aircraft sealed away for decades. What else could be hidden beneath the ice, waiting to be exposed? We might never know. With the glaciers vanishing before our eyes, what deeper warning lies? Keep watching to find out." A warning written in ice. Switzerland's melting glaciers are not an isolated tragedy. Across Europe, the ice is breaking apart in devastating ways. In July, disaster struck the Marmolada Glacier in Italy's Dolomites when a massive section collapsed without warning. 11 people were unalived in seconds. Italy's former Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, called it what it was, another deadly consequence of climate change. The pattern doesn't end there. Then, the next year, Europe was battered by droughts, suffocating heat waves, raging wildfires, and storms powerful enough to take lives. Everywhere you look, the same message echoes. The Earth is shifting under the weight of rising temperatures. On Switzerland's Rhone Glacier, Professor Daniel Farinotti and his team are tracking the damage in real time. Standing before enormous walls of broken ice, he points out the collapse of an entire section that crumbled. Nearby, another vast slab is sagging under its own weight, preparing to give way. The scientists are racing against time, drilling deep into the ice, using ground-penetrating radar to measure its thickness, and monitoring how quickly it slides downhill. But the data offers little comfort. The situation for glaciers is not good at all, Professor Farinotti says. They have been retreating for decades, but this summer has been particularly bad. It may well become the worst year on record for glacier retreat, and he doesn't mince words about the cause. The warming temperatures caused by ongoing climate change, he explains, are driving the ice into collapse. But glaciers aren't the only victims. Think forest fires, drought, extreme precipitation, floods, storms, he continues. They all have the same cause. For millions, the vanishing glaciers carry another, less obvious danger: water scarcity. At first, the melt releases torrents into valleys, fueling rivers and reservoirs. But as the ice shrinks further, that flow diminishes. Once a glacier disappears completely, its water source is gone forever. And for some, the countdown has already reached its final decade. The scientists make it clear that the fate of the ice, and the hidden secrets still locked inside it, depends on us. How much are we willing to do, and how quickly, to slow the heating of our world? The glaciers are not just melting. They're giving us a warning. And sometimes, that warning doesn't just come in numbers and graphs. It emerges in the form of things long buried, rising back to the surface when we least expect it. The Piper Cherokee aircraft is not the only aircraft that has been reported missing over time. So, what happens when an entire squadron goes missing in an endless ice field? Stay tuned to find out more. The Lost Squadron Beneath the Ice. The Alps aren't the only mountains giving up their secrets. Thousands of miles away, on the endless ice fields of Greenland, one of the most incredible aviation discoveries of the 20th century was made. Buried beneath more than 260 feet of solid ice lay the wreck of a World War II fighter plane, known today as Glacier Girl. The story begins on July 15, 1942. 8 American aircraft, 6 P-38 Lightning fighters, and 2 B-17 bombers were making their way to Great Britain as part of Operation Bolero, a mission to move planes across the Atlantic to support the war effort. But the weather turned against them. Clouds closed in, visibility dropped to zero, and fuel began to run dangerously low. With no other choice, all 8 aircraft made emergency landings on the vast Greenland ice sheet. The crews survived and were rescued, but the planes were left behind. Over the decades, snow and ice swallowed them whole, entombing the squadron in a frozen grave. One of those fighters, serial number 41-7630, would later be pulled from its icy prison and nicknamed Glacier Girl. What makes this story so extraordinary is not just that the plane was found, but also how deeply it was hidden. Decades of snowfall had buried it beneath 268 feet of ice, sealing it away like a time capsule. When recovery teams finally located and excavated it in the 1990s, the aircraft was in surprisingly good condition. After years of painstaking restoration, Glacier Girl returned to the skies, living proof that even the harshest environments can preserve the past with eerie perfection. But Glacier Girl was only one plane out of the 8 that went down that day. The others still remain under Greenland's ice, waiting for explorers or the warming climate to bring them back into the light. And if a fully intact World War II fighter can emerge from the ice after half a century, buried in silence for decades, what happens when one flies again? Keep watching to find out. Glacier Girl takes flight again. For half a century, Glacier Girl lay buried under Greenland's ice, a frozen relic of World War II. Then, in 1992, after years of relentless searching, members of the Greenland Expedition Society finally brought her back to the surface. The recovery itself was a triumph.
50 years later, a group of enthusiasts went back to Greenland and pulled out the wreck of this plane. It was a P-38 fighter, and saving it wasn't easy. It was buried by then in 250 feet of ice. They had to melt through and remove the plane in pieces.
An almost impossible excavation that required melting and tunneling through hundreds of feet of solid ice. Once freed, the battered but intact fighter was transported across the Atlantic, not to Britain, where it had once been headed, but to Middlesboro, Kentucky. There, over the course of years, skilled hands brought the P-38 Lightning back to life. Piece by piece, the aircraft was restored until, incredibly, it was not just museum-ready, it was airworthy. In October 2002, the impossible happened. Glacier Girl roared back into the sky, her engines thundering after decades of silence. Crowds watched in awe as a machine thought lost to history became airborne once again. But her story didn't end there. On June 22, 2007, the plane attempted to finish the mission she had been forced to abandon 65 years earlier. Taking off from New Jersey, she aimed to cross the Atlantic and finally land in England. Yet fate intervened once more. A coolant leak in the right engine forced her down in Goose Bay, Labrador. For weeks, mechanics worked tirelessly, eventually fitting her with 2 overhauled Allison engines. By July 23rd, Glacier Girl was repaired and safely back in the United States. Today, the plane can often be seen at air shows across America, a gleaming reminder of the persistence of both history and human determination. Eventually sold to Rodney Lewis, the CEO of Lewis Energy, she remains one of the most extraordinary examples of aviation survival ever recorded. But while Glacier Girl has been recovered, 5 other Lightnings and 2 B-17 bombers from the lost squadron are still entombed in the Greenland ice. Their fate remains uncertain, buried deeper with each passing year, and if one fighter plane could be resurrected from such depths. But as one plane rose from the ice, could another still be next? Let's find out more. The search for Echo. The saga of the lost squadron didn't end with Glacier Girl. For decades, explorers, engineers, and aviation enthusiasts have dreamed of pulling more of the buried aircraft back from beneath the Greenland ice. One of those planes, known as P-38 Echo, has been the focus of multiple expeditions. In April 2016, a new team assembled under the guidance of veteran pilot and explorer Ron Sheardown. At an airport in Saint-Hyacinthe, Quebec, they revealed their ambitious plan: to extract another Lightning fighter, one that had been trapped under the glacier since that fateful July day in 1942. The operation, however, was fraught with danger. Greenland's glaciers are not static. They shift, twist, and move slowly toward the sea. Over the decades, most of the lost squadron had drifted into treacherous crevasse fields, areas too unstable and deadly for any large-scale recovery. But Echo, the plane piloted by Captain Robert Wilson, was thought to still be within reach. Wilson's fighter had been the second to land that day. The first, flown by Brad McManus, flipped on its nose when the landing gear pierced the ice. But Wilson brought Echo down wheels up, sliding safely to a halt. The rest of the squadron followed suit, belly landing their planes across the ice field. For years, entrepreneurs Ken McBride and Jim Salazar led the effort to find Wilson's aircraft. After painstaking surveys, drills, and mapping, they finally announced in July 2018 that they had located the buried P-38. Plans for excavation were set for 2019, with support from authorities in Greenland, the United States, and the United Kingdom. But nature had other plans. As of May 2025, Echo remains trapped beneath the glacier, still waiting for recovery. Expeditions are being prepared for the future, but the window is narrowing as the ice shifts and the terrain grows more unstable. Still, the dream remains alive. For a brief moment in late 2023, a partially restored section of Echo was placed on display at the Lone Star Flight Museum in Houston, Texas, where crowds gathered to glimpse a relic that had been locked away for more than 80 years. The hunt for Echo reminds us that many of the world's most extraordinary artifacts remain hidden, buried under tons of ice. And as the glaciers retreat faster than ever before, more of these frozen time capsules are beginning to surface. But while Greenland's icy tomb still guards most of its secrets, they found Echo in the glacier. But what followed, and what rumors sparked? Keep watching to find out. Buried by time, not sinking through ice. When Glacier Girl and the Lost Squadron were finally rediscovered under nearly 270 feet of Greenland ice, many were astonished, not just at the recovery, but at how deeply the planes had been entombed. For scientists, the find was an undeniable marker of just how powerful and relentless the buildup of snow and ice can be over decades. But for skeptics, the discovery sparked a different debate altogether. Some who promote the idea of long ages or question biblical timelines argued that perhaps the planes weren't buried at all. Instead, they suggested the aircraft may have slowly sunk through the glacier, as if the ice had swallowed them whole. To support this theory, they often point to a simple classroom experiment, a wire weighted at both ends laid over a block of ice. Over time, the pressure causes the wire to slice through, melting the ice beneath it. As the cut refreezes, the wire appears to pass magically downward through the block. Videos and science demonstrations online, including those from the Wonder of Science project, showcase this phenomenon. In them, copper wire with fishing line and weights gradually slips downward through the ice, leaving the block intact. It's a fascinating effect, but it doesn't tell the whole story. The critical flaw is the environment. These demonstrations are performed at room temperature, where the wire can absorb warmth from the air and conduct it into the ice, helping it melt. But in a freezer, where the wire is just as cold as the ice around it, the sinking doesn't occur. Without heat transfer, the wire cannot carve its way downward. That distinction is vital when we look back at the lost Squadron. Once the aircraft were blanketed under layers of snow, they were locked into the same deep freeze as their surroundings. They could not sink through solid ice in the way a wire does in a tabletop experiment. The final proof lies in the position of the planes themselves. Aircraft are designed with their noses heavier than their tails. If the fighters had somehow melted their way downward through the ice, they should have been found buried in nosedive positions, tilted awkwardly into the depths. Instead, when Glacier Girl was uncovered, she was exactly as the crew had left her, resting wheels up on her belly, alongside the others in the same formation. This simple fact reveals the truth. The lost Squadron wasn't swallowed by some mysterious sinking process. They were buried, year after year, by relentless snowfall and the gradual march of glacial ice. The weight of time entombed them, just as it has buried countless other relics waiting beneath the world's ice sheets. And that realization makes the next discovery even more chilling. Because if the Greenland plains were preserved perfectly for half a century, then what scientists uncovered deep within the Arctic should never have survived at all. Yet somehow, unbelievably, it did. Buried by snow, not sunk by ice. What other ghosts of the past have re-emerged? Stay tuned to find out. The ghost of Mawson's dream. The ice has always been both a graveyard and a vault for humanity's boldest ambitions. Nowhere is that clearer than in Antarctica, where one of the earliest attempts at aviation on the frozen continent was only recently rediscovered after being lost for more than a century. On New Year's Day, an Australian expedition stumbled upon what they believed to be the remains of the very first airplane ever brought to Antarctica. The pieces of rusted metal tubing were found on the icy shore near Cape Denison, a place tied forever to Sir Douglas Mawson, the nation's most celebrated polar explorer. Mawson's story is one of daring and heartbreak. In 1911, less than a decade after the Wright brothers' first flight, he dreamed of flying over the Antarctic ice cap in a single-propeller Vickers plane. But before his expedition could even depart Australia, disaster struck. During a demonstration flight, the aircraft crashed. The wings were damaged beyond quick repair, and time was running out. Refusing to give up, Mawson stripped off the wings and hauled the fuselage aboard ship, determined to use the machine in another way, as an air tractor to pull sleds across the ice. It was an ingenious idea, but doomed from the start. The engine froze solid in the brutal cold, and the plane was abandoned on the frozen shore. Over the next 100 years, the machine slowly became entombed in ice, inching toward the sea with the slow march of the glacier. Many believed it was gone forever, yet fate had other plans. On a rare day when tides pulled back far enough, members of the Mawson's Huts Foundation spotted the remnants glinting among the rocks, an extraordinary reward after years of fruitless searching. "It's been an exciting search," said expedition leader Dr. Tony Stewart. Friday was possibly the only day in several years when the rocks were sufficiently exposed and the tide was low enough, and we were here to see it. The discovery of Mawson's lost plane is more than a historical curiosity. It's a reminder of how the ice locks away not only wreckage, but also dreams, failures, and human determination itself. And as climate change forces the glaciers to retreat, the past is surfacing in ways no one ever expected. But Antarctica's rusty relic is only part of the story. From a failed dream in the Antarctic, could tragedy strike even harder? Let's find out. The tragedy of Mount Erebus. Not every aircraft in Antarctica was destined to be found decades later, preserved in ice. Some ended in heartbreak. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 set off on what was meant to be a breathtaking sightseeing journey over the frozen continent. It was part of a series of scenic flights the airline had been running since 1977, giving passengers a rare chance to witness Antarctica's icy wilderness from the sky before returning home the same day. But the trip ended in catastrophe. The DC-10 jet never made it back.
These are the final moments of Flight 901, film taken on board the DC-10 moments before it slammed into the slopes of Mount Erebus.
Instead, it flew directly into the slopes of Mount Erebus, a massive active volcano on Ross Island. All 257 people on board, 237 passengers and 20 crew were unalived instantly. At first, investigators placed the blame squarely on the pilots, accusing them of flying too low in dangerous conditions. But the public demanded answers, and eventually a Royal Commission of Inquiry uncovered a shocking twist. The night before the flight, the coordinates programmed into the navigation system had been changed. The crew believed they were flying safely down McMurdo Sound, but the altered flight path had them heading straight toward the towering mountain. With poor visibility in the blinding white expanse, they had no chance to correct course. Justice Peter Mann, who led the inquiry, didn't mince words. He accused Air New Zealand of presenting what he famously called an orchestrated litany of lies to cover up the airline's role in the disaster. The fallout rocked the company, forcing sweeping changes in leadership. Even today, the Mount Erebus disaster stands as the deadliest accident in Air New Zealand's history, the deadliest aviation tragedy in Antarctica, and New Zealand's worst peacetime disaster. The wreckage, frozen into the ice, remains a stark memorial to the lives lost. One crash shook a nation. But how did the long night unfold? Keep watching to find out. The long night of waiting. At first, no one wanted to believe anything was wrong. At 2 p.m., the U.S. Navy noted that Air New Zealand Flight 901 had stopped responding to radio calls. Within minutes, search and rescue aircraft were being prepared. By 3:43 p.m., the official report showed visibility was a staggering 40 miles, and 6 aircraft had already been dispatched to find the missing DC-10. Back in Christchurch, the mood was calmer, at least at first. Flight 901 was scheduled to land around 6:05 p.m. for refueling and a crew change, and about 50 passengers were due to disembark. When the plane didn't appear on time, airport staff reassured waiting families that delays were normal. But as minutes turned to hours, unease gave way to dread. By 9 p.m., half an hour after the jet should have completely run out of fuel, the airline finally admitted the unthinkable. Flight 901 was missing. Search planes scoured the icy expanse of Antarctica, but for hours, they found nothing. Then, just before 1 a.m., a U.S. Navy aircraft spotted wreckage scattered along the slopes of Mount Erebus. No survivors were visible. At dawn, nearly 20 hours after the crash, helicopters carrying search parties landed on the mountainside. The scene left no doubt. The DC-10 had slammed into the ice at an altitude of just 1,465 feet, unaliving all 257 souls on board. The vertical stabilizer, still bearing Air New Zealand's iconic Koru logo, jutted from the snow like a frozen tombstone. Rescue teams recovered bodies and debris, but the violence of the crash meant many could never be identified. 44 victims were laid to rest together in a single funeral on February 22, 1980. A nation grieving as one. Hope faded with the night. What came next was grimmer still. Stay tuned to find out more. Operation Overdue, the grim recovery. What followed, the Mount Erebus disaster, was one of the most harrowing recovery missions in aviation history. The effort was codenamed Operation Overdue, and it pushed every rescuer to their physical and emotional limits. Pressure mounted quickly, especially from Japan, which had lost 24 citizens in the crash. By early December, up to 60 recovery workers were stationed on the icy slope at any one time. A team of New Zealand police officers, joined by a mountain rescue crew, flew in on a C-130 Hercules to begin the grim work. Inspector Jim Morgan, who oversaw the mortuary operation, later described just how demanding the mission was. Identifying the dead required meticulous record-keeping, since many victims had been fragmented by the crash. For weeks, pathologists, dentists, and police combed through remains, sometimes identifying a person from nothing more than a finger with a usable print or a set of keys in a pocket. In the end, 83% of the victims were successfully identified. But the conditions were nightmarish. The recovery teams camped in polar tents directly amid the wreckage and bodies, working in relentless 12-hour shifts. There was almost no water at first, just one bowl for everyone to wash in, the liquid blackened from the environment. Plates and utensils couldn't be properly cleaned, often passed from one shift to the next, and many rescuers could barely stomach their meals. Their polar clothing grew saturated with what Morgan described as black human grease, the residue from burned remains. Gloves were quickly ruined, and the team longed for replacements simply so they could keep writing, bagging, and tagging each body part with accuracy. The psychological toll was brutal. Skua gulls circled constantly, feasting on exposed remains. The rescuers tried everything, shouting, waving, even throwing flares, but the birds would not relent. To protect the dignity of the victims and preserve identification efforts, the team gathered remains into 11 large piles and buried them temporarily under snow, only to exhume them again when helicopters could finally return. Even the logistics were punishing. Helicopters ferried bodies to McMurdo Station in cargo nets slung beneath their frames, while those left behind had to keep working with fewer hands each trip. Debris whipped up by rotor wash turned every lift into a dangerous gamble. Weeks of this grind left the team physically broken and mentally scarred. And yet, in the middle of such horror, there were moments of human release. When a storm trapped the team at the site, they allowed themselves a macabre party with liquor salvaged from the wreck, just to ease the crushing weight of the job. Even cigarettes, which had run out, became a shared lifeline, rationed equally among police, military, and civilians alike. Looking back, Morgan said he was proud of what they accomplished, despite the anguish. Their work brought closure to grieving families, even when full answers could never be given. Decades later, in 2006, the New Zealand Special Service Medal, Erebus, was created to honor the extraordinary sacrifice of those who took part in Operation Overdue. In 2009, some of the American personnel who had helped were also formally recognized in Washington, D.C. What happened on the slopes of Mount Erebus was not just recovery. It was survival, resilience, and grim duty carried out in one of the harshest places on Earth. So, what are your thoughts about the planes that were discovered after years of being buried in ice? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.